One of the details I asked the panel to really focus on a little bit earlier when we were talking about collaboration and partnership and how that may well happen as a strategy and work out as a strategy to get to SDG 2. One of the things I asked them about was details, examples, down on the ground. And because they're such important people, we were up here and I'm down here, I'm like details, 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 which is why we have our next guest on, because they work with GAFSP down on the ground and they will talk about the projects and that experience and what it's like and what they've been doing. Honourable Janine Cooper, Minister of Agriculture in Liberia, is joining us, and also Mr. Noel Kutera Bataka, former Minister for Agriculture for the Republic of Togo. So we have Togo and Liberia in the house. Great to see you. Minister, let me start with you. It's really great to have you. Very briefly describe the GAFSP projects that are happening in Liberia.
Thank you very much, Femi, and it's a pleasure to be here speaking to you from Monrovia, Liberia, especially because Liberia has been one of the recipients from almost the inception of GASP funding under both the public sector investment window and the private sector investment window. We started with a $46.5 million grant in about 2011, 2012. That's just now winding down. And when you talk about examples, the GASP, a little bit before even we had the SDG conference and the financing for development, the GASP was already looking at ways of bringing on board all of the different stakeholders, including civil society organizations, farmer organizations, governments, private sector. And that's not said enough. So Liberia has benefited from 3 GASP projects so far, and we're about to start the 4th one, which I had the privilege. I just become minister about 8 months ago, so I've been very involved in the negotiations of this new smallholder agricultural development for food and nutrition security project that's coming on board in early 2021. And the flexibility, I can't say enough about it, but let me stop there and give an opportunity to my colleague to speak.
Noel, it's really great to have you here representing Togo. Tell us about the projects briefly that are in Togo right now that are funded by GAFSP.
Thank you very much, Finny. It's always a great pleasure to participate in a panel with you. You're such a great moderator. Togo has had the honor of benefit from GAFSP at a critical moment after the food crisis and the economic crisis of 2008. Togo was coming out of a long socio-political crisis and put in place a national plan to invest in agriculture with funding in 2009, and the first projects that the country had piloted, and I was lucky enough to be involved in the preparation. That's how the first call SP was launched, and Togo benefited from this. At the time, we had a food deficit of 17% with GAFSP. We were able to fund $39 million, the project to support agriculture in Togo and to help the agricultural sector, Baza, to and the World Bank contributed to this. We were able to avail the small producers kits, what we call the kit starts, and these are seeds, fertilizers, enabled 51,000 households to be able to grow crops and get out of food insecurity. And we supported the organization of producers smaller rural companies, and we developed value chains. Thanks to this mechanism, Togo was able to significantly reduce the prevalence of under nutrition, which and so in 2013 and 2015 we were distinguished by the FAO for our exceptional efforts to reduce malnutrition in Togo. So these are concrete results thanks to the reactivity and the funding that GAFSP put in place, and Togo can say that it was part of the countries that needed it most, and GAFSP indeed was able to bring about solutions as quickly as possible that saved thousands of Togolese, and 3,000 producers were able to make it thanks to this financial support.
You've heard from Liberia about the programs that they are doing, have been doing with GAFSP. Let me go back to Liberia, because one of the things the minister said that jumped out at me was the word grant.
You're muted.
It wasn't.
We're not hearing.
Audio for me, please. So one of the things.
The first part of what you said was muted, so we didn't hear you.
So, Minister, one of the things that jumped out at me when you first spoke was the word grant. It wasn't loan. It wasn't you need to pay this back to us over a period of time. It was the word grant. Explain to me what difference that makes when you are given the funds to execute a project and you don't have to pay the money back.
Thank you, and that's exactly true, and that's one of the really positive aspects of the GASP funding, is that it's been coming in grants. The public sector investment projects that I mentioned, the first one has laid the foundation, but there's a couple of other ones that have come in as private sector investment projects. And I just want to say a little word about those, because that's what's unique. Almost all of the development projects that we have, whether on food security or in the agricultural sector, is looking mainly at the public sector and civil society, maybe farmer organizations, cooperatives, etc., and leaving out the private sector. And you can't really have a value chain approach if you're not looking at all of the different actors in the value chain. And so when the gas came on board, and as I mentioned earlier, I think they grasped, as a funding agency or development funding, they embraced that concept of partnership with the private sector and between the private and public sectors earlier than maybe some other development partners. And it's that flexibility that's made a difference. When we are talking about it, because
Janine,
they looked at food security, not
Minister,
just
if I may.
Yeah, sorry.
Because I see a lot of donor programs, and sometimes there is a difficult relationship between donors and recipients, because donors have an idea of what the recipients should be doing. And everybody remembers the Ebola crisis. And there is a story that I want you to tell about GAFSP funds, because that to me shows unbelievable flexibility. We know how challenging it was for West Africa that hadn't really seen Ebola before, had no experience of Ebola before. And I know you're in your ministerial flow, but for me, as a journalist, that jumped out at me. What happened to your GAFSP funds during the time of Ebola in Liberia?
Well, what happened when there was, and again, that's where they jumped into the private sector, and looking at beyond just food production, and the normal food things that would go, but seeing how we could support the private sector to actually boost livelihoods, In the cocoa sector, we had a private sector investment project from the GASP of $5 million for the cocoa sector, helping them to build storage facilities for farmers. And then supporting rubber farmers, because rubber farmers are the largest agricultural employer. The rubber sector, sorry, it's the largest contributor from agriculture for Liberia's GDP at between 13 and 17%. And so the GASP had that flexibility to come in and support those areas that would enable people to be able, when you have your livelihood more secure, your food is more secure. And that was the that came directly after the Ebola crisis, and also tweaking the project that we had ongoing, the smallholder agriculture productivity project, to embrace commercialization, so that we could go all across the value chain and not just get stuck on one part and then not really impact food security as we'd like. And so.
Let me go back to former Minister Bataka in Togo. Right now, GAFSP is looking at a replenishment fund and looking at how they build up their funds again for the next 5 years. When people are watching this, they may well be watching this live, they may well be coming back to the GAFSP website in months or years to come. What is it that you would say from your experience that you would say would encourage other donors, other stakeholders to put into the GAFSP Replenishment Fund? What story would you tell? What example would you give?
There are three essential elements on which we can capitalize, and that's the strength of GAFSP. It's an instrument that enables you to respond to emergencies. And right now, there is an emergency with a shock linked to the pandemic, COVID-19. Togo had experienced this shock, was right out of a crisis. And thanks to GAFSP, we put in place solutions that enabling 1,000 producers to have kits for production. It enabled also local companies to develop, to create employment. And the second point, which is essential, we are in a context of a climate change. The agility of GAFSP, its flexibility enables countries, as my colleague Minister Cooper, to respond to each country in a tailored way. That's one of the originalities. It's different from other types of financing that we've experienced. We're getting as close as possible to the needs of the people in every country, taking into account context and conditions. In a context of climate change, Togo, for instance, we were able to develop technologies through GAFSP to test the mechanism of sustainable management for land and water, to test irrigation. And Togo is based on this to develop irrigation, drip irrigation. And another thing that's very important, and Minister Cooper also underscored this mechanism must create a necessary ramp for sustainability, and GAFSP enables us to develop value chains with the private sector without building solid bases. We were just out of crisis. We didn't have a robust agricultural institution. There was virtually no private sector in agriculture. The farmer organization, thanks to GAFSP, we able to give the farmers a way to get around and help Togolese entrepreneurs to set up shop with competitive measures. And there was this blossoming. These three elements strike me as essential to bring about the donors to fund this instrument, which is a wonderful tool for development. It's a grassroots instrument, and it's adapted to each country. Tailor-made.
Former Minister Bataka from Togo, current Minister Cooper of Agriculture. Really helpful to have you. We really appreciate you bringing us those concrete examples, those stories down on the ground.